Hello, and welcome to the Catching the Octopus podcast. Here, we will explore how connecting inward gives us an advantage outward. We openly talk about the obstacles and challenges and difficulties that life throws our way and how they become moments of gratitude and things that can benefit us when we look back on our lives. I'm your host, Naomi Hurley, and it is my mission to bring you top quality guests that will share with you openly their obstacles and also the techniques they use to go inward that strengthens the way that they serve themselves and others at the highest level. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. So, welcome to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. Today, we have Lynne Harwood with us. Now, Lynne is a successful CEO with strong strategic leadership, business acumen, and management skills, enhanced by a successful career in organizational transformation. She's a respected leader, lateral thinker, and influencer in the community sector who's effectively driven transformational change and reform through 6 organizations over the last 20 plus years. Lynne is a highly committed, people-focused, and values-driven professional with the capacity to analyze organizational strengths and drive change to achieve sustainable, appropriate outcomes. Well-developed and highly effective communication, influencing, relationship building, and negotiation skills are applied across all levels of government and private sector stakeholders when they're dealing with Lynne. She has a proven capacity to provide strong strategic leadership in an environment of significant and constant change, including establishing sustainable governance and management structures. So her leadership includes a commitment to champion the organization's vision, mission, and values with that strong stakeholder focus and a commitment to meeting and exceeding client expectations in the delivery of high-quality services in tandem with performance and expectations monitoring. So Lynne holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree and is a certified practicing accountant. We won't hold that against her. No, just kidding. But she has exceptional skills in financial management as well, resource allocation, financial modeling, and budgets with a focus on financial viability. So kind of the all-round package, right? She's got the commercial aspect down and also the people aspect, which is pretty handy for a leader. So welcome, Lynne, to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Naomi. I've been really looking forward to this.
Oh, so have I. To be honest, it's been really good. Lynne and I have caught up for a couple of one-to-ones, and our conversations just tend to go and flow and just go wherever they need to. So I was looking forward to having you on the podcast.
Terrific. No, I'm really looking forward to it. And I think free-flowing conversation is what this is about.
Yeah. So the people aspect of what you do, I mean, I've spoken to some of the people that work with you and they validate all those things that I just said. So it's not just written off a script. But I know that one of the strong focuses from you is that empowerment of people, right? And I get it, because empowering the people around us is what then gives us the scope to be able to sprinkle our magic, right? As leaders around the organization. What does empowering people look like to you? How do you facilitate that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a believer in sayings and quotes. I collect quotes and sayings for the purpose that being able to articulate yourself in a certain situation at a certain time is often useful in a quote situation.
Yes.
And for me, in the regards to the question you've just asked, I really believe it is a job of a leader to create more leaders, not to create followers. If you're creating followers, you're just feeding fish rather than teaching people to fish. And so that's really important to me. So from the very beginning, and whether somebody's the cleaner or whether somebody's the deputy CEO, it's valuing everybody, knowing everybody's tasks, everybody's contribution is really necessary, is genuinely respected and genuinely needed in the whole cog of the wheel that form the organization, and then setting about and empowering them to do their job, know the boundaries, because the fact is, once you set good structure, good policy, good rules and process to follow, then actually giving freedom's easy.
Yeah.
The The problem only comes when you don't have those, structures in place, and then allowing freedom can often be complicated because you don't know
Yeah.
what you're giving freedom within. So,
Yeah.
so for me, it's understanding the boundaries, understanding the non-negotiables, understanding the expectations for everybody, and then setting people free to go about and achieve, but also understanding what wraparound they need to be at their optimum, to be operating at their fullest potential.
Mm. And it's that, I suppose it's that understanding the people, isn't it? Because the expectations and boundaries for one person may be seen as restraints by another, right? So it's trying to understand the people and what they need.
You absolutely can't treat people as a cookie cutter model. There's no
Yeah.
doubt about that. You really, I mean, for me, understanding your people, understanding their strengths, understanding their needs, understanding how they need to be managed, and
Mm.
also understanding their style of managing up. Because I believe there's an equal skill in managing your people, but also your people managing you, and knowing
Yes.
to manage up. And I
Yeah.
think management is an interesting word because I really think it's much more about leadership than management. I
Yeah.
have that notion that management is doing things right, where
Yeah.
leadership is doing the right thing. And I
Yes.
think there's a real difference there because, just because you need to tick those boxes and cross those T's, it's not necessarily the right boxes or the right crossing of T's that is actually happening. So you need to think about what is right for the organisation. What is the priorities, and what are the needs of the organisation as well. But certainly for me, it's understanding people's temperaments, understanding what makes them tick, understanding that they're literally people who, you only need to touch base with, occasionally, or
Mm.
have touch points with. And then there's other people who genuinely need more of your time, more of your attention, more of your guidance, and
Mm.
understanding that. And so long as you've got the frameworks for that, it works well.
Mm. And I love how you were saying that as well, the leadership and management, how they're different things, but we tend to put people in a management role without leadership capability and then throw them under the bus when it doesn't work, right? Like, not.
I call that the Peter principle. There's actually a principle in business, in organizations, which is employing somebody to their level of incompetence. So you say,
Yes.
oh, you were really good at that task, or you're really good at that particular aspect. Great. I will now treat you as I will now promote you to be a manager, and I'll get you to watch all the people and oversee all the people doing that particular thing, but you're not also giving them the skills and the wherefore to actually do that. And before you know it, that they're well out of their depth. And what, was somebody who was a fantastic person at one level,
Mm.
then, really you've made them, in a sense, you have created a world where they can't thrive, and
Yeah.
that's, nobody wins from that situation. So yes, not everybody is a people manager, and knowing who your sort of subject matter experts are, or your introverts who love doing their thing, or your
Yeah.
project people who love doing the projects, etc., is quite different than managing people. Because when you're
Mm.
managing people, you really have to give of yourself. And if
Yeah.
you're giving of yourself to people, it means you've got less time for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay if you understand that and you can work with that. But when you think that you can still do the same amount of tasks yourself, or same amount of things you need to achieve yourself as an individual, and be there for the team, that's just not going to work.
No. And one of the things that I find really interesting, I love what you were saying there as well about having to give yourself, right? So one of the things I find interesting is speaking to people, especially in senior leadership roles, that are kind of like, oh, I've been doing this for a while. I don't feel like I need to grow or change or any of that sort of thing. And in my head, I'm like, every day there's growth in leadership. Every day we're challenged. And that shows then that they probably haven't been given the guidance and the right avenues to actually understand that, hey, tomorrow I'm going to be different to what I am today. That's just how the world
Yeah.
works.
And also that change is exciting and good. And
Yeah.
progress is one of the inevitables in life, etc. And I also think in that notion there, you're talking about the energy that people emit. And for me, being in a room full of clean energy people, clean energy exchange, it's
Yes.
almost like energy etiquette.
Yes.
Being there, being your best self and emitting your best self and your good intentions in that situation is really important, because
Yep.
as we know, the actual spoken word is only a very small percentage of what communication is about. So when you've got somebody saying one thing, but their whole body language, their whole emittance of energy is saying a totally other thing, you've got incongruence. And
Yep.
that's often where tensions form, and that's often where trust is broken, etc. So for me, I always call it the notion of what we think, what we say, and what we do must actually be in sync. Because if it's not, you're not congruent. You're not congruent to yourself, let alone your team or your organization. So yeah, that is so important.
And people can sniff that a mile away, right? It's like a horse knowing fear, right? Like
Yeah.
inauthenticity and coming in a place where you're not showing all of those things of being congruent. Instantly, people know they can't trust you.
Exactly. And there's also the energy vampire context as well, where, those people suck the good energy
Yes.
out of the room, or, the notion of the rotten apple can spoil a barrel. It's so
Yep.
true. So, really, I always say one of the things I've always believed and has proven to be true time and time again throughout all the organizations I've served is that the best thing you can do for good staff is actually remove not so good stuff.
Speaking my language, but people don't do it, Lynn.
No, and it's all the other things you got to do, unless you do that bit,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, because you're just wallpapering over cracks if that's the case.
Yeah.
You've really got to own it and say, the most disaffecting aspect for good staff is when they see poor behaviors or lack of alignment being accepted or not being addressed.
Oh,
And yeah,
yeah.
I like to call it being pleasantly persistent, that you set your standards. The standards we set are the things we're prepared to walk past. So don't be prepared to walk past anything that you don't want as part of your organization or your organization culture. And say what you mean what you say, but never ever be mean about saying it. And so it's
Yes.
really genuinely being pleasantly persistent to say, I know you're not on top of your game today. I know that while you were saying X, Y, and Z, your body language was perhaps slumped, or you
Yep.
were perhaps indicating other messages through your body
Yes.
language. What's that about? How can we work through that?
Mm-hmm.
And not tolerating it, so that eventually people understand that they're not got to get away with those behaviors. They're not got to be able to do it.
Yeah. And I think that's, yes, it's important for the organizational culture, and yes, it's important for the other people, but it's equally important for them. Because how many times have you been, come across someone like that, where you've had those interesting conversations, you've challenged them how to chat, and they're kind of like oblivious, like, wow, I didn't even know that was the case. And you've helped them change their life.
Yeah. And that also comes to something, Naomi, called there's a structure about unconscious incompetence, unconscious competence, conscious incompetence, and conscious competence.
Yeah.
And so where do people sit in that? And so there's genuinely people who are in that unconscious incompetence phase, where they genuinely don't know that the way they are behaving or interacting or what they're emitting is not optimum, is not conducive. And I find that they are really great to work with, because working them through what they don't know
Yeah.
and shining light on that, and giving them glimmers of understanding that then they can run with and take carriage of is really rewarding. The next layer of that, though, is actually more complicated, and that's where you've got conscious incompetence.
Yeah.
And that's where people have then got to the level where they know that they're not aligned, or they know
Yeah.
that their actions aren't the greatest intentions, or they know
Mm.
that perhaps their skill set is not as mature as necessary in that area. And that's where the conflict often arises, because they're trying to cover that up often, or
Yeah.
they're trying to avoid the
Mm-hmm.
inevitable conversation. So that is where it becomes a bit more tricky, because you then that's where unauthenticity comes in as well, because
Yeah.
once you know, you can't unknow.
Yeah.
And however, if you're not aligned to that knowing, then that comes across in all sorts of different behaviors, and different characters or different personalities will exhibit that in different ways.
Yeah.
And so understanding that is really important too.
Yeah. So I talk about the 4 roles that people play. I don't know if I've ever spoken to you about that before,
No.
but that comes from the subconscious programming that we get through caregivers, school, all of those sorts of things. And
Mm-hmm.
all of it's about being enough. Like that's what we know everyone just wants to be, right? They want to feel enough. And so
Yeah.
the rebel, when they were younger, they got their attention from their parents by doing the wrong things, right? And when I'm saying attention, it's not just looking up from the phone and going, oh, don't do that. Like that's when everything got put down. And even though it wasn't in a positive experience, it energetically was still, gee, I'm connected with you. If you're
Yeah.
connecting with me, I'm enough.
Yeah.
Right. And so they come through wired, and changing that can be really tricky.
Yeah.
Right. Then you've got the achiever, which is kind of, I sit in that space. When I did exceptionally well, I had that one-on-one connection. I'm like, cool, that's what I need to do to be enough. There's the sick one. So again, they were not really given the intense attention unless they were ill or something was wrong with them.
Yeah, creates the hypochondriac. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're always the victim. Everything's going wrong, because when you stop and go, oh, are you okay? They get that rush of enoughness.
Yeah.
And then there's the carer. So they always had to look after usually a caregiver or people in their family. And when they did, they got the, so then that's how they sort of bring into that space. So, and then you can be combinations of them. But
Yeah.
sometimes even just sitting with people, I found, and actually going through that and explaining that can create the conscious incompetence to go to a higher level of consciousness, right? And go, so I'm not unique. You can explain why this is happening. I don't want to be like that, you know?
Yeah, so in a sense, you're re-empowering them, but in order to re-empower them, they have to take ownership of that, and they have to want that. And that's where it gets tricky. But I love the descriptors you've used there, because I think that really does paint a really clear picture about the types of needs of different people.
Yeah. And I think for me, I deliver that in some of my training, but the purpose of that is to be able to create an understanding, right? So, John or Jane comes at you and the way they behave, and you can go, oh, look, they're having a bad day, right? They're coming at me from this place of victim. They just need some attention from me. They just need me to go, oh, are you okay? Is there something I can do for you? And then you can come into the place of going from coaching or helping or however, because you've met their need to be feeling enough.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I also think it's the dynamics of all the different people together as well as the organization culture itself. So, excuse me, I think for me, I've always believed, a couple of sporting analogies is that notion that a team of superstars will always be less than a superstar team. And
Yes.
so this notion of everybody knowing where they are in the team and how they can contribute and what their role in the team is. And so the team dynamic creates the sums that are greater than the parts is so much more powerful than having a whole group of experts or a whole group of subject matter. I know my stuff, but collectively they don't gel together, and collectively it's almost like they're trying to keep each other down in order to rise themselves, which actually doesn't gain net benefit for teams. So I also think there's on the notion of the proverbial bus, who's on the bus, who's off the bus. It's not just about the bus itself, it's about being on the right seat of the bus at
Yes.
the right time or right point in the journey of the bus as well. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important to bring together. And some team environments and some team dynamics really bring out the best in individuals.
Mm.
And other situations don't. So I think it's really about how an individual shows up as their best self, or what do we need to do to help them be their best selves.
Mm.
And at the same time, they have to be their best self within the team environment and the organization culture environment
Yeah.
that's there. It's no good, oh well, in that other environment I could do these things and get away with these behaviors, or these sort of things are accepted.
Yeah.
Well, it's just not in this environment. So in this environment, we need you to polish that off, or uplift those particular elements. And I think that's a really important aspect as well. And that's why, that's why there's also just timing is everything for people, and why people, come through a life cycle within an organization, and it comes to an end and they need to move on, or, really stay for several years because it works for them, etc. And I think that is really important. So I always say too that anybody who thinks they're coming to the end of the journey within the organization, well, let's make that really positive too. Actually, let's make that a beautiful ending, and let's help you find your new pathway, whatever your new pathway needs to be, or whatever your next part of your journey needs to be. Endings within an organization cycle don't have to be unpleasant either. They can actually be really productive, not only for the individual but for the group again, and for the organization again. And so, it's all okay. People aren't meant to stay static forever, or organizations aren't meant to stay static. We're all meant to, progress together. And if the level of progress or the pace of progress is different for different people or different for the organization, then that's okay too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's about having that right energy match, right? Isn't it? To what's going on. And sometimes I think, and I've been guilty of this myself, sometimes I've overstayed my welcome or my happy place, and I've been really great in a job. And then as I've started to not be happy, instead of going, actually, this isn't serving me, I've let it become a place where then I've behaved poorly. But because I haven't been happy.
Contributed to it. Yeah. Which actually, that's actually a really good note as well, because it's the notion that timing is everything. And I always believe leaving somewhere at the peak, not at the trough.
Yeah.
And life is full of peaks and troughs, and that's okay. So when you're at your happiest or most productive, or when you've got that momentum, that's a great time to start thinking about, and what's next.
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want Naomi or any of her guests featured on your podcast, or as a keynote speaker at your next event, you'll find their contact details included in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about how you can work with Naomi individually or as part of your strategy to improve leadership in your business, then review the courses, offers and services at getupandgoconsulting.com.au.
And what is my next step, and how can I make sure my behavior and my contribution and my attitude now is actually contributing to my next step, not creating a chasm for me to get to the next step.
I did. I've learnt, right, over my years. You tend to learn as you go through it.
Lovely to know.
When I left corporate, I sat down. There was a lot of structural changes happening in the organization, and my role was being split up, and it was really beneficial for the company. Admittedly, a little bit of me did take it personally at the time. Now I look back, I go, it wasn't about you. It was about the business. But the way that they had structured, I knew that I wouldn't have filled my cup. And so at that, and I've learned enough now that at the time I sat there and I said, I don't think I can stay here anymore. And kind of was a bit, that was a bit of a shock. And I went, yeah, I'm shocked too. But I know now that if I do, it's not going to end well. And my analogy was, I want to leave the football team with a Brownlow, not with a hamstring injury.
Beautiful. Right? Couldn't agree more. So yeah, so I always believe, always know your exit strategy.
Yeah.
And your exit strategy might be 5 years away, it might be 2 years away, it might be, but always know that, and always never burn bridges, always leave with, a flow, that flow of energy, take that flow of energy with you, and also leave behind. I remember, I've had trials and tribulations through all sorts of work environments, but I remember in my very, very early days in one of the first accounting firms I worked for, in country Victoria. It was actually the second one I worked for. It was in country Victoria, and it was in an area where there were more sheep than people, and it was very traditional. And I was actually the only female accountant, qualified accountant in the organisation, and so it was very, very interesting. And the mentor, the person who was working with me, was a lovely old man of about 70 years old, classic grey suit wearing accountant, and I'm this absolutely full of energy, burst into be given the freedom to set about building my career in this accounting firm. And he actually said to me, and it still sits with me today, and it was one of the wisest things anybody said. He said, Lynne, what you must understand is we are all just a fist in a bucket of water. And when you remove the fist, the water must envelop like you've never, ever been there. Although the water must be enriched for the fact that you have been there.
Oh, I love that.
He said, so don't make this about you. and as a 23, 24-year-old, that was just exactly the reality check I needed to go, wow, that's really powerful. And I have actually built my career on that. I've actually built my career on truly making myself as indispensable as possible as soon as possible. Making it not about me, and making it not about needing the organization's apron strings tied to me, or needing staff apron strings tied to me. Quite the opposite. To be really genuinely there for the organization, to serve the organizations that I work for and that I lead, and make it all about the people we serve, the organization. It's servant leadership is really important. And equally helping make staff self-sufficient, so that there is none of this neediness. And then when the time's right, remove the fist from the bucket of water. The water envelops again, but is enriched for me having been there. But then I move on, and the organization can move on as well. And I think that's really important. I think when I hear people say, oh, I've been in this organization for 15 or 20 years, or I've been especially at senior level. So I've been CEO of an organization for 20 years. The first thing I do is go, oh my gosh, unless you've been constantly developing, constantly transforming, constantly seeking new opportunities, and then what have you been doing for 20 years? Please don't tell me it's the same thing over and over. So I think that's really important. As a leader, don't overestimate your presence. Create a world that doesn't need you. That's the best thing you can do as a leader.
Oh, I love that. And I feel like that is possible as well when we get to a place where we're actually controlling our ego rather than our ego controlling us. Right. And I know when I left my position, I promised them, I said, when I leave this place, you won't know that I've been here, right? It'll be smooth. It'll be handover. And, more than likely they found some things that I'd forgotten or I'd made mistakes on, because we're all human.
Oh, absolutely.
I felt like I'd set it up so it was just seamless. The people were all prepared. I had notes and everything for handover, even if I wasn't able to do training. There was reference points. And there was still a little part of me, though, after I finished, that was like, I set that up because I knew that's how I could serve at my best level. There's a part of me that still wishes and hopes that they miss me, right? Because the ego is still there, right?
Look, I think the ego is a really important conversation, and I think it's important. You know, as human beings, we've got an ego. You can call it, you know, the big self, the little self, whichever version of it you want. But ego has its points and its benefits.
Yes.
And ego's got a really ugly side to it. And so I think, and it's also about that fine line between confidence and cockiness.
Yes.
And you know, while it is a fine line, once you cross that line, it becomes really ugly territory. It becomes really unpalatable energy once again. It becomes, you know, energy that's not clean. It becomes, you know, etiquette that's not clean. So I think understanding your ego is key to understanding yourself. Never thinking that you've mastered it, because you'll never master your ego. But there are days when you can keep it under control and keep it at bay and be detached or discerned from it. And they're really, really good and productive days. And on days where there's no discernment and you can't detach from it, they're the days that are not so productive, and they're the days that you're not being your best self. You're not being clean energy. But I think anybody who says, oh, I've mastered my ego, I know what I'm doing with, you know, whoa. Well, the ego's that sort of thing. It reminds me of like
the ego's telling them that they've mastered the ego, right?
Yes,
it's like
exactly. And it's like the scorpion's tail. It comes back and lashes you when you least expect it. So egos are really complicated yet simple thing. And at the same time, that difference between wanting people to be confident, wanting, especially, you know, young people coming up, wanting them to be full of vim and confidence and wanting them to really explore their potential is all really great. And if they're able to do that and keep their ego at a discerning status, then it's wonderful. When the opposite occurs, it really can have ugly consequences.
Yeah, well, as an achiever, my ego is fed, or my enoughness is fed through people giving me compliments, right? And so I go and do things purposely to not get the compliment, and, you know, all these little tricks and stuff. But when I'm there and someone does give me a compliment now, I acknowledge it and I go, oh, thank you. My ego loves that. Right. And just have that acknowledgement, because it's still a part of me. And I think, like what you're saying there, is having that acceptance that it's there. And sometimes it's a bit more of a battle, and other times you have it at bay a lot easier.
And I think there's also the sort of dichotomy of that too, where what I've tried to condition myself to do is the notion that when those things, you know, when the wins come or when the success comes, great, that's wonderful. But equally treat it like when the not so pleasant outcomes come or the trials and tribulations come. So it's good. Accept it and acknowledge that it exists, and that's wonderful. But don't get carried away with it, because you know that whether it's tomorrow or next week or in a few weeks' time, there's got to be the total converse of that, which is the trial or the tribulation or the thing that's not going so well. So trying to accept them both with a level of humility is actually the key. And you know, that will always be a work in progress. But that notion of the humility that leaders must have and really display at all times, in the good and the bad times, is really crucial.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you're talking about those challenges is a really great segue into some of the questions that I ask all of my guests. So thank you for that. So firstly, I like to think that when we're suffering from something, when we're have an obstacle in front of us and it's creating pain or suffering in our life of some way, that it actually has the ability for us to strengthen our connection inward. So one of my questions is, what's the biggest obstacle that you've had to overcome, and how did that strengthen your connection inward?
Look, I think, you know, if we look at it from an introspective point of view, I think that the biggest challenge and the ongoing challenge is things like the ego, and is things like the, you know, self-growth and you know, really developing one's own EQ, etc. I think that's a never-ending challenge. But certainly I come across work challenges all the time. So if we're talking about from a work challenge, you know, by the nature of the roles I've taken on, they've often been very transforming. So an organization is at a point where it is in desperate need of transformation. And in order to start, often well behind the eight ball, as
Yes.
organizations that need transformation need, and
Yep.
then set about that process, the amount and the level of challenges often comes thick and fast. And just when you think you've opened every cupboard and every skeleton's fallen out of that cupboard, a whole new wardrobe appears with a whole heap more
Only
of
graveyard.
exactly, and the skeletons are coming thick and fast. So look, I think for me, once again, I come back to this notion of, treat every challenge in the moment. So it is in the moment, and then, what are we going to do to resolve that or fix that or deal with that or make sure that aligns to the other things that need to happen, and not waste or expend energy in the emotive side of things. So the discernment of, yes, this is a little doozy. We didn't contemplate that this particular little doozy would be here today, but it's a fact. It's here. What do we need to do to resolve and move forward with this without turning it into a saga, without expending unnecessary emotive energy in it, putting it all in perspective and context? And also know that even while the most tricky and turbulent of situations are occurring, there's also still a lot of good happening as well. So be able to see that contrast and be able to appreciate that contrast as well. And I think for me, I use the word discernment a lot, but there's often something which I say, which is called passion, compassion, and dispassion. So I've chosen to work in the for-purpose sector for a reason. I do care. I do want the world to be a better place. I do want communities to be empowered, and I do want to make sure that the weakest members of our community are supported with dignity and provided for, as we should expect everybody to be provided. So with that, that comes with a compassion and empathy. But in each situation, you have to have the dispassion to be able to deal with that situation or that particular circumstances. So know the difference. And being dispassionate or discerning doesn't mean you're not compassionate and empathetic. It just means that you are focusing your energies where you're going to have the most impact and where you're going to least expend wasted energy, because all the perceived emotion and passion around it, you can bring that distance. So I think for me, that is has been my challenge, continues to be my challenge, the notion of dispassion towards the subject matter, and really then being able to focus on it and turn it round. And equally, like I said, that humility of knowing that the successes of today might be the challenges of tomorrow. So treating them both with the same level of humility.
I think the dispassion side actually serves the other person better, because when we're in that compassion side, we're clouded by emotion, right? Like that's where we're coming from emotion covered glasses. So when we can step outside of that, then we are looking more as an observer and can give better advice or better opportunities or better learning, and growth strategies and those sorts of things. So I think that's great.
I think also that also relates quite well to the fact that I have chosen to be in the for-purpose sector. And in that, though, the reason I call it for purpose is because in old world terminology, it's always been known as the not-for-profit sector. And for my mind, and I know we've had these conversations now, that if you're saying you're not something, you're creating a neural pathway that's telling you are not something. You are creating your own blockages. So for me, I've always liked to use the terminology that I use surplus for purpose sector. And the reason I say surplus for purpose is because our sector might be a for-purpose sector, but unless we are run like a well-oiled machine, unless we are a really efficient and effective organisation with good business acumen, we're not going to be able to meet our purpose no matter what. So that it's almost like the intrinsic nature of the purpose and the surplus have to run in tandem to be successful. You can't have one without the other. And I think in old world thinking, it was all about, oh, bleeding heart, we are very for purpose driven. Whereas for me, I've always been, how can I apply my business acumen, which, obviously, as you said, I've got a Bachelor of Commerce, I've got a CPA. How can I apply that in the most useful way to the purposes which I serve and to the organization's core? And so for me, once again, it's the dichotomy of those two things that actually together is what brings the strength.
Yes. And with and I really get that and how that works, because when I'm dealing with my clients in the therapy space, you have to be able to detach. And really that's what it's about, isn't it? And I know if we go into that esoteric space, attachment is pretty much the causing of suffering. If we want to go real deep, we'll simplify it. So having the ability to detach is something that a lot of us have not learned how to do. And
attachment is also about the ego as well. So it comes back to the conversation about ego and keeping your ego under wraps or under control. Very much detachment is a part of that.
Yeah, no, most definitely. So when you were talking about obstacles and challenges, and I find that not only does an obstacle then give you the ability to strengthen inward, but there's times where when you're in it, you're not the observer, right? When you're attached and you're not detached, it can become overwhelming. But there's a point where we look back at things, and I reckon everything has something that we can be grateful for. So do you have a challenge in your life that would have been overwhelming at the time that you're now grateful for? And how did it become of benefit to you?
Oh, look, indeed. I believe everything happens for a reason, and I believe everything happens at the time it's meant to happen.
There are no mistakes. That's my little mantra.
Exactly. And I don't say that, laissez-faire, and I certainly don't say that without believing we're totally in control of our own free will.
Yes.
But I do believe, that things unfold, things manifest as they're meant to. So look, I can look at several challenges like that. I even think too when I was a teenager and deciding where I was going with my life, and I was quite unsettled as a teenager, and I left school at quite an early age, really. And all I wanted to do was go traveling the world. That was my one ambition as a 16-year-old, 15, 16, 17-year-old. I just wanted to travel the world.
Yeah, right.
What did I need to do to be able to have the appropriate funds and resources to be able to travel the world? Yeah. And coming from a very, working class Yorkshire family, I didn't have, resources at my disposal. So I had to, work, and I worked in biscuit factories, and I worked in the mill, and I did cleaning and babysitting and waitressing, and you name it. I did anything possible to earn the funds I needed to go traveling around. And so for me, that gave me some of the greatest lessons in life. And some, as a 15, 16-year-old working in a factory, these are things you learn, maybe you shouldn't learn at that age, but those lessons and those learnings are just phenomenal. And I remember actually achieving my first trip and going and doing a 6-week trip of Europe. And I remember being stood at the Eiffel Tower at the end of it and thinking, wow, I achieved the goal I set out to achieve. But then very quickly, I then said to myself, how am I going to continue this? How am I going to, what are my next steps to continue this momentum? So lots of challenges there. And also, interestingly for me, I've had the pleasure of living all over Australia as well. And there's been times where I've consciously gone, okay, this is the plan. We'll do this. We'll wait till this project or this job completes, and then we'll move to this place for these reasons. And that, worked and worked well. And then there's been other times where, due to a set of circumstances or a calling or what would you call it? An invitation or an opportunity arising. Circumstances have changed, and I've literally ended up somewhere where I never thought I would, and then gone, well, this is amazing too. So I don't actually, people often say, well, what's the nicest place you've lived or the favorite place you've lived? And I've loved them all. And the reason I've loved them all is because they've all added to the threads that weave the tapestry of life.
Yes. Yeah.
And I feel so enriched by having all the experiences I've had.
Yeah.
And some of them have been absolutely plain sailing and wonderful, and others have been wonderful too, but because of the trials and tribulations that were related to them.
Yeah.
But they all still form the tapestry of who I am. And so that notion of being able to reflect as well, and the balance between reflecting but not navel gazing, I think is really important.
Yeah.
So really being able to, question, and it's almost like an appreciative inquiry of yourself. If I had that time to do again, what would I do different? At what crossroads would I have gone left instead of right, or right instead of left, or, but not turning that into nasal gain, and certainly not into a, woe is me, or, anything like that. It's really going, well, that happened, and wow, I'm stronger, wiser, greater for it.
Yeah.
At what decision-making point might there have been a different curvature to take?
And that resonates with me so much, because I think that's the key, if I'm speaking out of turn here, but that's the purpose of life, right? We have these experiences, pleasant or unpleasant, and it's about accepting that this was the experience I was supposed to have at this point in time. But if I was here again, would I do something differently? That's the whole continuous learning journey. And okay, I'm going to take these tools and I'll go, oh, hang on, this is feeling a little bit familiar. I've got the tools for this, right? Bang, bang, bang.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really true. And I think actually in coming to Western Australia this time, so I originally started my Australian journey in Western Australia, and then I moved over east for 26, 27 years. So I've come full circle back to Western Australia. And in taking on the role I've taken on, it was very known, very understood that I was taking on an organisation that needed monumentous transformation. And that transformation was several-fold. The whole world around us had been changing with the types of contracts we had and the types of government funding that was available. The structures had been changing. The world now has a fully functioning NDIS system, so there was elements of that happening. And so it was almost like a siren call, in a sense, in coming back to WA. And I think it was very much around the fact that WA's disability sector was also transforming at that stage. It had entered NDIS a lot later than everywhere else. But so everybody obviously the board appointed me, everybody I spoke to were really honest and authentic about the challenges that our organisation were facing and the need for that transformation. So was very well informed, very well equipped, and obviously having done this several times before, have a very broad toolbox of tools that can be applied at any given time, situational, etc.
Yeah.
And then the actual realities of some of the different scenarios, different situations, different timing of things was as different as you could imagine. And even though even though I'd been prepared, I'd been explained that the types of challenges we had, those challenges sometimes turn into a big whopping situations. But working through that and working through knowing that it's all about, well, this situation now exists. What are the steps that are needed to deal with this situation and make sure we can deal with this situation without it affecting other elements of what we need to do? So it's really back to that discernment, logic, and really almost like a pacing as well, like a pacing for, you're not going to change this overnight. So what is the pace and the format that is needed? And at the same time, knowing that the types of people I needed to bring with me on this journey may or may not be in the organisation when I arrived here. So what did that need to look like? And what types of people needed to come on the journey, and knowing that for us to move along this transformational journey, it really was about getting the right people on the bus. So, dealing with those challenges and just naming the challenges, not trying to pretend the challenges didn't exist or trying to, sugarcoat over the challenges, just, seeing them for what they were and then setting about dealing with them.
Yeah, nice. Now, my final question I have for you, and we're running out of time, so I'll try and be quick with you here, is what sort of practice do you do daily, monthly, weekly, however, that actually allows you to strengthen that connection inward? Because it's the connection inward that actually gives us the stability for our emotional intelligence, for our regulation. What do you do that strengthens that?
Look, I do a series of things. I certainly do daily meditation, and for me, it's the start of the day. I'm an early riser. I get up, and the first thing I do is meditate. Now, I don't think there's any, there's many ways to meditate. There's many ways, and I don't think it's I've often had people say, "How do you actually do it? What's the formula? What's the format?" And I actually think it's keeping it simple is the format.
Agreed.
It's really having that discipline, and it's it's not dissimilar to going to the gym. It's disciplining the mind, and it's really being there. I also do mindfulness regularly throughout the day. I have little practices. It's something as simple as, to my mind, to truly be present, your senses have to be engaged, one of the five senses. So for me, I'm in meetings back to back throughout the day. I have a little technique which is about touching the table and bringing myself back to the moment. So touch. If you can feel that you are touching, then you are present. At the present. And so I can put closure on one meeting before I then go into the next. And it's just a few second recalibration to go, okay, that was the closure of that meeting. Let's compartmentalize that now, and let's move on to the next meeting. But also being in nature is also something that's really important to me. So every weekend, whenever practical, I like to get out bush and just immerse myself in nature. And I find, and I know if things have been too hectic or too busy and I miss a day or two of meditation, I know I'm not being my best self. So it really is getting back on the horse, really making sure that there. So I think this is a lifelong journey. It's something you have to work at. It's something you never go, I've got this. The minute you say you've got this, you deserve that next
the next challenge to show you. No, you don't.
Fall out of the cupboard. But certainly for me, that works really well.
Yeah, awesome. I do a couple of those things myself, and I think I've had people ask me about meditation as well, and they go, "I can't shut my mind off," and I'm like, "Well, then you should be meditating." And I'm honest with them, and I said, "Look, there's times where I meditate, and my mind doesn't shut off either. It's not about being perfect at it. It's a practice. But that time of silence, even if I get 2 seconds silence in my meditation, is what helps me keep centered. So I find it really important myself." So look, thank you very much for jumping on. If anyone does want to reach out to you and have a chat with Lynne and just, get some advice from you or just have a one-to-one with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Look, they can either reach me on LinkedIn. I've got a profile on LinkedIn, or they can reach me through my work email here, which I'd be delighted to reach out and speak to anybody as well. So lynne.harwood@fp.org.au.
Beautiful. And I'll pop that down below as well for anyone who does want to catch up with Lynne. If anything did connect with you, I do suggest catching up. I do suggest, though, if it's an hour catch up, leave an hour and a half, right? Because that's what we had to do, right?
Absolutely.
Don't limit yourself. But thank you very much for jumping on. I really appreciate you coming on, Lynne.
Terrific. Thanks, Naomi. It's a pleasure as always.
Thanks for joining in and listening to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. It's been great having you here. And if you'd like to go and like and subscribe and maybe even leave a 5-star rating if you think it's worth it, I'd really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.